Okay, so let's take a look at blood pressure. So a couple of pressures we've already talked, I've sort of mentioned in a previous chapter, systolic pressure and diastolic pressure. So systolic pressure is the maximum arterial blood pressure. So this occurs when the ventricles are contracting. When the ventricles are contracting, they're pushing more blood out into the blood vessels. So those blood vessels are going to expand during that process. All right. Next is diastolic pressure. So diastolic pressure is the lowest arterial blood pressure. So during diastolic pressure, the ventricles are relaxed. And if the ventricles are relaxed, more blood is flowing into the ventricles, less blood in the blood vessels. So those blood vessels are going to recoil. All right. And so this alternating increase in pressure and decrease in pressure in the blood vessels is what leads to the pulse, right? So the pulse is alternating expansion and recoil of those arterial walls, and that's all due to the ventricles contracting, pushing more blood out into the blood vessels expand, and then the ventricles relaxing, which allows those blood vessels to recoil. Let's look at influences on blood pressure. One is just our blood volume. Right? So our blood volume is our hematocrit and our plasma. And it's about 5 liters or 8% of your body mass, right? So if we have more blood in the same amount of tubing, so in your body, right? What that's going to do is that's going to increase the blood pressure, right? So one of the things that, somebody who has high blood pressure is told to avoid is sodium in particular. Because if you take in more sodium, you're going to retain more water. And if you retain more water, well, that's going to increase your blood volume. So what a diuretic does is it causes your kidneys to get rid of more water out of your blood. And so by urinating more out, you're going to lower your blood volume. All right? Next is heart action. So heart action is a component of a few things here. So one is stroke volume. So this is a volume of blood discharged from the ventricle with each contraction. And then also cardiac output, which is a volume of blood discharged from a ventricle per minute. So cardiac output is a function of both the stroke volume and also the heart rate. So if we increase either the stroke volume or the heart rate, that's going to increase cardiac output, pumping more blood out of the heart. And so that's going to increase your blood pressure. So if your heart rate increases or your stroke volume, pumping more blood per contraction increases, your heart rate, your blood pressure will go up. If we lower these, your blood pressure will go down. Next is peripheral resistance. This is a friction between the blood and the walls of the blood vessels. So this is really like a hindrance to the blood flow. All right? So if we increase peripheral resistance, we're going to increase the blood pressure. So a couple factors that influence peripheral resistance. One is viscosity. Viscosity is essentially the thickness of a liquid. You can think about this as resistance to flow, all right? So how do we make our blood more thick? Well, you have more red blood cells in it, all right? So the more red blood cells you have, the more viscous it's going to be, the higher the peripheral resistance, so that's going to increase your blood pressure. So one of the things that we give people who have high blood pressure is we give them blood thinners to thin the blood out, so that reduces that viscosity. Next is the length of blood vessels. So the longer the blood vessel is, the higher the peripheral resistance. And this is just a function of, if you have more tubing, you have more contact between the blood and that tubing. So taller people or obese people are going to have higher blood pressures just because they have more tubing. Next is the diameter of the blood vessel. So looking at the diameter of a blood vessel, so the smaller the blood vessel, the higher the peripheral resistance. So this is going to happen with us over time, well, a lot of us I should say, when you have arteriosclerosis. So if you have plaque accumulating on the walls of your blood vessels, that's going to make them thinner, all right? And then, it's going to make the opening smaller, and that's going to increase blood pressure in there. Another thing that occurs with age is that our blood vessels become less elastic. So just like everything else in us becomes less elastic. So they're not going to expand as much when our ventricles contract. And so that's going to increase blood pressure with time.